Well, hi there and welcome back to the Drawing Database. Professor Marc Leone. Today we're going to look at and spend a little bit of time with the drawings of Paul Cezanne, a French painter, if you will, the grandfather of modernism, the precursor really right up to Cubism. Born in 1839 and died in 1906. One of the giants of the art world, known primarily for his landscapes and certainly his still lives, in beginning to explore color and broken planes and awkward transitional states between academics, representational painting with figures and realism into an internal kind of spatial construct where we have multiple points of view, right on the cusp of modernism and certainly Cubism. So what we have here, beginning with this portrait drawing here of different faces, is really a lovely study by charcoal of the same figure here, probably earlier Cezanne in a more academic style. What's important to note that, such a strong modernist, really kind of sitting alone in his studio out in the countryside and beginning to fashion a new point of view for the art world. So, a lot of folks, especially if you're just beginning, it's a little bit harder to maybe get a grasp on Cezanne. We'll kind of take you through some of his drawings to see how he evolved from this more academic kind of style, which is structurally very sound. We see that. We see the top of the head here. So a very good academic draftsman of sorts. It's clunky, right? A little bit of Van Gogh, kind of an influence. There's kind of a post-impressionism movement to modernism. But let's see where he evolves to with his drawings. And then certainly if you get more excited about art history and then again as well as the history of painting, you can see where he evolves to. And here we see a figure study, and you can already see the loosening of academic rigor and constriction into a more choppy, almost kind of plainer, a little bit flatter style. But we still see the evolution of kind of almost a Tintoretto-esque, if you will, sort of linear scribble gesture. Think about Daumier. You can see kind of influences in Daumier through here and through the figure. What really holds it together is a good use of gesture, scale, and proportion, and some nice line weight variation to kind of pull it all together, and a little bit of tonality. If you think it's clunky, it is a little clunky. Cezanne's trying to emerge from one particular way of working into a whole new way of seeing, and this is in transitional kinds of states or status for that lovely kind of leg in through there, weaving with the toes. Really nice place to see. Still good academic or strong drawing. Here we start to see the emergence of a flatness, a hatching kind of style, in the emergence of trying to almost get at three-dimensional kinds of planes. When you look at Picasso and you look at Georges Braque and perhaps Miro and others, we see the opening, or even really early Duchamp and Duchamp's brother, we see the more the high conclusion of synthetic and analytic cubism. Here we see Cezanne struggling with what to do with his career and how to portray time and space in different representations of the same person. So there's an earnest movement to break constricture here in these drawings. And here we see kind of a full-on recognizable Cezanne, classic sort of feeling of almost like a bather, but really individuals at a park or along the Seine, along the river, with a sweeping kind of composition, figures in the sky. So kind of a fantastical drawing from his imagination. We see note-taking in through here. So watercolor and also graphite pencil in a very loose gestural side. We see the artist here at the easel painting through, so very loose and opening up from the constrictures of the academic, from the atelier, from the past, into something fresher and newer. Yes, far less structured and far more abstract. So if you're more of a purist, you'll find these to be a little harder to take. But it's important to remember where we've evolved to also in the art world, and certainly in this case, drawing. So scribble, gesturing, value changes, linear variety of line width and changes, and really broken down figures into scribbled kinds of dots and dashes and symbols and linear kind of squiggly marks. Here we see the quintessential Cezanne bathers. Notice the composition is almost separated in two planes. We have the figure here, very strong horizontals with the nude figure leaning back into. So the understanding and the idea of composition and the studying from the Renaissance and certainly Baroque and Romantic past, Neoclassicism to now, bathers were kind of a constant theme. We saw it in the drawings of Ingres. We see it here. We see an imaginative study, again in graphite, and then also heightened in watercolor. Very loose, very abstract, freer, a much kind of freer style. When we look at Cezanne's brush stroking habit and pattern, we also notice this kind of choppy, sort of scribbled hash mark. We can also see that later on in the drawings of Jasper Johns. So there's a foreshortening into sort of pop and late modernism. Here we see a portrait of a young woman, pretty much a direct kind of portrait, very pensive or quiet moment with the figure. We see really good structure, and then we see the opening of the simplification of value, a more abstraction, and a slightly more planar with some more angles. Think about Manet and think about Cezanne together as they begin to open up a new language for the likes of the next generation of artists, certainly Picasso and Braque. And again, the lovely, more academic, probably again earlier Cezanne of two horses moving back into space. Notice the tone of the paper, perhaps a white back then, but it's a little bit more of a mauve kind of color. The slight texture on the paper to take off the charcoal a little bit more readily and also easily, and really the lovely control of scale and proportion in perspective. The horse moving again almost like a box or two back into one point perspective, and the blunt end of the horses hold really well together in the drawing. Good line weight variation, good scale proportion, three-dimensionality, curvature, contouring of line throughout, which makes it really a lovely academic study. So Cezanne could draw very well, but you have to ask yourself, did he want to continue on the same sort of traditional academic path, or did he want to break the mold? And Cezanne most assuredly broke the mold. And we could see that in the other drawings that we've seen, certainly in his career. So he's one to really look for. And lastly, a plaster cast drawing, a flatter style, later Cezanne. We can see that this favors comparatively to some of the bathers that we've seen. And again, we see the beautiful gesture. What's not lost here is rhythm and movement. What is beginning to be seen is more contouring, flatness, right? It's still working with the figure, lovely line work in through here, and then a kind of almost plainer, more simplified kind of style, so he's really more choppy, but still working with C curves and also S curves. And then the indication of the head, the curvature of the head, which is flat and somewhat slightly three-dimensional. Cezanne is a big figure, a transitional figure in the art world. In some ways, much like Giotto was, transitioning from the Gothic to the Renaissance. I see Cezanne in the same mode, transitioning from the continuance of representational art into more abstraction, internal art, and then certainly on into abstract expressionism.